Greetings, Winding Trail staff. My name is A&N Sicklick. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center for Children's Advocacy in Hartford and a longtime presenter in the Winding Trails training sessions that occur prior to each summer's camp. It's my pleasure to return for this virtual training. As many of you know, I've done this for several years in person in a always overheated Garmany Hall. So in a way, it's kind of a pleasure to do this in a cooler situation, but I'm sad for the fact that I'm not able to do this in person and usually pick on one of my sons who has been in the room for many years as a counselor. The purpose of today's training is to reassert for some of you and to introduce some of you some basic concepts about dealing with the issues of abuse, neglect, and bullying, all of which I hope none of you have to deal with this summer, but inevitably some of you may. This isn't the most upbeat of trainings, but it's an important one, especially for this time when campers who are coming from all over are desperate for outdoor fun and to interact with each other for the first time in many months. So I will be brief, but hopefully somewhat instructive and give you some insight into the world of abuse and neglect, what your responsibilities may be, and to talk a little bit about bullying and how to confront that. So with your permission, I'm going to start a PowerPoint and I will share the slides in order to go through the presentation. Okay, so this is really not a legal presentation as much as it is a more of an advice and counsel in terms of what to do and how to deal with issues that arise in the day-to-day work that you will be doing this summer at Winding Trails. The two topics I'm going to cover are how to deal with and what to look for in terms of abuse and neglect, and how to react to issues of bullying, all of which, again, we hope you are not confronted with, but the possibility exists, in fact, that you may. So as I have done in the past, and I'm sure many of you remember, I have a couple or three case scenarios which I want you to think about. Pause the training perhaps for a minute or two and think about what you would do if you were confronted by these cases. Number one, there's a 10-year-old in your unit, and this 10-year-old repeatedly uses sexually explicit language in references to both campers and to you. The camper confides in you he was touched inappropriately by a house guest a while ago, but asks that you not say anything because it's her mother's friend. The question is, should you say something to someone? Traditionally in these training sessions, I am able to reach out to you and ask for your answers, but think about it for a moment and then scribble down an answer. What do you think you would do in this particular scenario? So that's case scenario number one. Case scenario number two. Again, a familiar case, but perhaps for those of you who haven't been through this training, an opportunity to look at the differences between what may be actually abuse or neglect or what may not be. So here we have an 8-year-old camper who complains that his elbow and arm hurt because he tells you his sister pushed him off a playscape yesterday. Says his sister always picks on him, but there are no other indications, of abuse or neglect. So the question for you is this something you should talk to a supervisor or the camp director or the nurse about? Think about how this differentiates itself from the first case scenario. How would you react to case scenario number two? And then number three. This is the case of a 14-year-old in your unit, 3 campers who go to school together and are friends. The 4th camper happens to also be a classmate but is constantly the butt of jokes by the other three, to the extent that this fourth individual always looks like she is or he is on the verge of crying or in tears. The actions, at least of the other three, seem relatively harmless to you, but the fourth does not respond when you ask her directly or him directly, and you're really concerned that this teasing is bothering this camper. So what do you do, if anything? You have three scenarios. Number one, where a camper has talked to you about being the victim of an inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature and is acting out in that relatively same term. Number two, you have the kind of intrafamilial squabble between the camper and his sister. And number three, you have what appears to be kind of a classic case of bullying. How do you respond, right? What are the gradients of import of the three? Well, I think your instinct tells you that in case scenarios 1 and 3, there is something for you to do more than just listen. In case scenario number 2, it may be important for you to kind of validate the concerns, but also indicate that siblings by nature are probably pushing each other off playscapes and other devices almost every day of the year. So case scenarios 1 and 3 probably, in fact, most likely deserve further attention, certainly to address the concerns and to alleviate any ongoing issues with the camper, especially in case scenario number 3. I'd like to just give you a little bit of background. I've done this before, year by year, just so you have some updated numbers. Abuse, neglect, and bullying are real issues. I'm sure some of you have seen them in person in school. You understand that there is a not necessarily an epidemic of abuse and neglect, but it exists out there, and these numbers are relatively straightforward. The number of kids who are in DCF care, that's the Department of Children and Families, of course, the number of referrals made, the number of victims of abuse, the statistics about how many are for neglect, abuse, sexual abuse, and tragically, the number of fatalities that occur every year in Connecticut for abuse and neglect. So it's a real problem. Hopefully, again, you don't see any acute instances of this in your tenure this summer, but be aware that these data, in fact, are up to date, and they are actual, they are real, and this kind of stuff does happen on a regular basis. The question is, what must be reported as a matter of law? And what we have is the legal requirement that people who are mandatory reporters, individuals who by law must report abuse and neglect, are required to report abuse, neglect, or an individual who is placed at imminent risk of serious harm. And the subcategories are there on the slide, okay? The question is, who must report these incidents of abuse and neglect? And at Winding Trails and at other places, there are defined individuals who are what we call legally mandated reporters of abuse or neglect. At Winding Trails, it's the nurse, the camp director, and the assistant director. Those are the defined individuals who are legally mandated to report. But you, as counselors, although you may not be legally mandated, and you may be in your other life, if you're teachers, for example, or you work at school, you are not legally required to report, but you certainly have an obligation as a camp staff member to report the incident to those who may, in fact, have a legally mandated duty to report. And we'll talk about that now. While you are not necessarily a legally mandated reporter, your obligation is to be the following: an observer, an inquirer, a reporter to a supervisor or to the camp director, and most importantly, as I said in years past, a friend and confidant to those individuals who are, in fact, there and can rely on your counsel, your friendship, and most important, to listen to the concerns that they are, in fact, saying to you. Hopefully, you won't have to do this, but I've said this before and I will say it again, do not undervalue how much these young individuals look up to you as leaders, as mentors, as individuals who are someone who's there to listen when they may not have that at home, or they may feel compromised, for example, during their school year. So observe, inquire, and then report these concerns to your supervisor and the director, and most importantly, be a friend and a confidant. Okay? You do not have a legal duty to report, but you may report. And again, going through the protocol that Winding Trails has, you should go through that protocol, and those folks who are mandated reporters will report to the following number. But in your off time, you should perhaps know that this is the State Department of Children and Families hotline for reporting abuse and neglect. A word about bullying as well. We know that bullying occurs most often in the schools, but it can happen at camp as well. This is a definition of bullying that you can find on the stopbullying.gov. That's the federal government's website regarding definition. It's unwanted aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. Okay. And so that's really bullying. And you can see how that same dynamic that occurs in the school situation could also occur in a camp situation as well. So if you want to investigate a little bit more about bullying, you can certainly feel free to take a look at the government's website, but know that there are anti-bullying laws in all 50 states. Most of the states have laws that are designed to protect students in school, but other laws may apply, such as harassment, assault, other types of laws to protect individuals from unwanted bullying in a much larger sense. What to do if you see bullying? Well, don't ignore it, certainly, and don't assume, as in perhaps slide number 3 earlier, case study number 3, that your assessment of the kidding around is harmless, because it's not your judgment that counts, it's the victim of bullying's judgment that counts, right? Putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who may be far different from you and have circumstances far different from you is critically important. But don't think that you need to take care of it yourself. There are resources at camp. I know that you've been instructed on how to deal with that, but folks like Keith and other supervisors at camp can certainly point you in the right direction, but stop the immediate conduct. Right? That kind of conduct should not be tolerated, even if it seems to you like harmless teasing. Don't think it won't repeat itself, and then take the issue to up the chain of command, and then work out a plan, obviously, to deal with the issue. Because I can tell you that I have heard over time, and I know that an entire summer can be ruined by one day of bullying that is not addressed immediately. And I think that that is something you should keep in mind. Don't let the opportunity pass if you're confronted by that. So going back to the original 3 case scenarios, right? Number 1 involved a young individual, the boy who talked about being touched inappropriately. That would definitely require you to report that, and then the judgment would be made by those in the camp who are mandated reporters to report to DCF, and undoubtedly that would be a report, regardless of whether the individual, the minor, the 10-year-old here, asked you not to report that. Yes, that is certainly within his purview to say, don't report it, but it is not something that the mandated reporter takes into account. Scenario number 2, which was the playscape incident, certainly not a reportable incident, but certainly address the concerns of the youth, tell them that they are in fact valid concerns, and maybe give some suggestions on how to deal with the over-exuberant older sibling. And number 3, the incident about bullying absolutely should be something you would address, should be something that you should report, but certainly stop the conduct immediately. Those are the slides. Those are the bits of information. Here is some information about the State Department of Children and Families and bullying. But most importantly, remember that your actions and your deeds can be extremely impactful to younger individuals who look up to you. Your ability to deal with these situations quickly, but also with the counsel and advice of your supervisors and the camp director, is critically important. And don't forget how important, especially this summer, is to young individuals who have just not had that opportunity to go out and have some fun other than in their house or in their backyard for the last 3 months. Enjoy your summer. Have a fruitful, productive one. I hope the weather is good and that the campers are fun, and good luck to all of you. And thank you for your patience and for watching this.